coinciding with this, there was also, this is like through the late 80s, there was this big controversy going on with the Catholic Church here in Canada over this orphanage, Mount Cashel Orphanage. And it was, what had happened is a bunch of priests and monks were getting exposed for being child molesters. And I wasn't really brought up with too much of a religious upbringing, and I wanted to understand. I was like, well, I thought religion was supposed to be about something else altogether, and not pedophilia, And so I thought, well, I'm going to read the Bible, and I'm going to start reading the Bible, and I'm going to see what this is all about. And I started reading it, didn't make any sense, and I kind of stuck it aside in this night watchman office and forgot about it. And then the Gulf War started in Iraq. And when the Gulf War started in Iraq, people were comparing Saddam Hussein to Nebuchadnezzar, the last king of Babylon, because he was at Babylon, sat in Iraq, and he had attacked Israel. Saddam had shot a Scud missile over into Iraq, and so people were comparing him. And so one day I'm sitting in the night watchman's office about 2 a.m, smoking some weed, and I'm reading this newspaper, and there's an advertisement for a sermon. Revelations 18, The Fall of Babylon. It's by Pat Robertson. He's sitting at a pulpit, and behind him is tanks and jets. And I'm like, wow, these guys are tying in the Gulf War with the book of Revelation. And I thought, well, I'm going to read the book of Revelation right now, man. And I grabbed the Bible that was sitting there, and I thought, okay, I started reading it, And it begins, and John, he takes a scroll and he puts it in his mouth, and it tastes as sweet as honey, then it turns bitter in his mouth, and he begins to prophesize. And I'm like, what has he eaten, man? And I'm like, whoa, this is really tripping me out. And I got a little further, and they're all wearing sackcloth, and I'm like, well, that's kind of weird, making me think of hemp cloth. And they're talking about billowing clouds with the prayers of the saints. And I got to the end of the Bible, the end of the book of Revelations, which is the end of the Bible, Revelations 22, and it said, on either side of the river of life stood the tree of life, bearing 12 manners of fruit, yielding its fruit each month. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. And when I read that, I had this very powerful experience where light just poured into me. And I was like, wow, this is like about cannabis, and all these fruits are as industrial uses that we can use to fix the planet, and its healing leaves are the medicine, And I just totally freaked out. And I called my wife up at the time, my first wife, and I started talking to her. And she thought I was having some sort of mental breakdown and started crying. And then the next day, I got up and I was like, was that real, or was I just tripping out? And after that, I would look around at these clear-cut mountains, and I thought, I've got to start talking about hemp. And so I started this group, Patriotic Canadians for Hemp, and started promoting industrial uses of hemp and stuff like that. And I thought, if there's anything to this stuff about the tree of life and religion, then somebody somewhere else will know about it. And I started kind of collecting a little bit of information on it. Whenever I came across anything about cannabis and religion, I'd photocopy it and stick it in the file. This was just kind of when computers were really kind of getting to be home-oriented and stuff like that. It was kind of out of my grasp. And I should mention, too, I had no background in history or religion or writing or anything like that at this time, And so I started filing it. And then it just so happened the first guy to import hemp cloth here in Canada was this Chinese businessman in Vancouver. I went over to visit him, and I see this poster on the wall, and there's a hippie in a pot patch with his head sticking out between some leaves, and it says, Church of the Universe, Tree of Life Sacrament. And I'm like, holy shit, who are those guys? And those are my friends from the Church of the Universe. They order a lot of hemp shirts, and I call them up, and I'm like, hey man, cannabis is a tree of life. And they're like, yeah, cannabis is the tree of life. And I send them some stuff, information I've been researching, and then they send me back a booklet from the Ethiopian Zion Coptic Church by Brother Jeff Brown down there in the United States, down in Florida, who wrote a little booklet, Marijuana in the Bible, you know what I mean? And then it was like a further expansion of the material, same sort of thing. Somebody with the same sort of vision, collect this historical information, And Jeff's a real pioneer in this area as well of research, and so and that's how I kind of initially started, and that developed into articles and magazines, and then books and various books, and now I'm just finishing my 4th book on the subject, and generally getting a lot of considering the controversial aspects of the types of things I'm writing about, getting considerable academic support and interest in my work, and it's really taken credibility. And I have to say here, 28 years later, when I look back on that revelation, and that's what it was for me. It was like the life-changing moment. It was like there's a before and after in my period of life, and that was that moment. And it has really panned out. And I look at how far cannabis has come, from a time where you couldn't even buy a High Times to there's like half a dozen probably dispensaries within a square mile of my home. There's a billboard on the corner advertising how to find cannabis dispensaries. It's come a long way, and cannabis has become this powerful world issue that is like a paradigm shift, and it's always marking that marking point, that center point between the future that the Trumps and Sessions of the world want to bring us to with their cool, beautiful clean coal and oil money and all that type of shit, and fighting the flower to that green world of solar energy and herb growing and hydroponics and that type of technology and hemp plastic and all that type of stuff. And we are at the forefront of trying to tip that scale, because it is going to go one way or the other, brother.